Welcome to Accelerate My Practice. I want to continue this series on the economy and what in the world is going on with it. Previous episode, we were discussing what was going on with it. What's the cause of it? What's the driving forces? What should we continue to watch for to try and keep a pulse on where it might go? In this one, I want to hit the big picture business concepts of what we can do to do well in an economy that might be challenging. And then in subsequent videos, I want to make sure and dig into the nitty gritty that are really specific to your dental office as to what you can and should do. So this one I want to hit big picture business. And what I want to do is I want to kind of go MBA on you for a moment and use the metaphor of learning from other businesses and other industries. And specifically in this illustration, I want to use Southwest as the example. If I go back in time to 1994, Southwest was an emerging airline. They were doing well, but they weren't a big player as they are today. Today they are, if I'm not mistaken, the largest airline in terms of the number of passengers they transport on an annual basis. And thus have grown since the mid-90s into a behemoth, truly. And the question becomes, how'd they do it? If we go back to the 90s, it was an interesting time, right? We'd just come out of the 70s where fuel prices and inflation, our current circumstance, were a huge issue. And we were sort of enjoying this growth phase of the economy, one that I hope we can get back to. And what was interesting during that growth phase of the economy is you were watching fuel prices start to skyrocket. So what did the CEO of Southwest do? Something really savvy. He went and bought years and years of fuel contracts. He locked in his costs, his biggest costs. I don't know if it's his biggest, but I would have to imagine between the equipment, fuel, and salaries, those are his top three costs by far, I would guess. I'm not an expert in the airline industry, but fuel is a big one. So seeing that fuel prices were headed up, he was very savvy, and they went and locked in their fuel prices by signing very long-term contracts, like 10, 15, 20-year contracts, to keep their fuel prices at the current level that they were in 1994. And that turned out to be a brilliant strategy, because what ended up happening is fuel prices, oil prices, doubled, quadrupled in the next 10 years. And they got to enjoy a level of profit that none of the other airlines could even come close to competing with, because they didn't have this foresight to lock in their fuel prices. So as I sit there thinking about that, it comes to my thought process of, well, what can we do in the dental office to lock in our costs? And it's not quite as easy, but there are some illustrations. If I go back 10, 15 years in dentistry as an illustration, probably the biggest thing that took place relative to this was CAD/CAM. You know, prior to the CAD/CAM, or prior to this time frame, 20 years ago in dentistry, you know, for good crown work, you were $200 a unit or so. And the challenge became, if you did more units, your costs got really high. And that was about the time I came into the industry. And one of the conversations I had, using again the Southwest metaphor, is you can lock in your prices through getting a piece of equipment that is for sure not inexpensive, but it's a piece of equipment that once you buy it, your costs go way down. So if you're not a CAD/CAM user, that would still be one illustration you could go after to locking your costs. Another illustration would be renting versus owning. You know, I realize that the interest rates are headed up and have already gone up in some instances. So buying right now maybe doesn't seem as attractive as it did about 4, 5, 6 months ago. However, I think interest rates are going to go even higher. And I think back to like my first mortgage, and it was 7, 8%. And I'm talking to some of my coworkers, their first mortgages were 12 and 15%, depending on the timing of their purchases. And I don't think it's unrealistic to think that we might see interest rates in the double-digit range. So if you become accustomed to thinking everything should be 5 to 7%, I hate to tell you, it's probably going to be different than that. So if you can buy an office now, or build an office now, and maybe buy, because building's a pain in the butt. Construction costs are crazy. But if you can buy a building now and move into it, and then not have rent escalating and escalating and escalating, it would be another illustration of this. Outside of that, we got to start getting creative. So can we go to our lab people? Can we go to our suppliers and lock in our costs? Can we go to our suppliers and say, hey, if I'm willing to sign a very long-term contract with you, can I freeze my prices at today's rates? I don't know if they'll do it or not, but it's certainly worth asking. And maybe they're willing to. Option 2 is if there's not expiration issues, you could stock up. I don't know if that's the best use of cash, but it's another illustration of the same point. So beyond those examples of locking in our costs in dentistry, those are at least the only ones I can think of. If you can think of others, man, make comments in the video below so I can update or share some other via some other method. But those are the only ways that I can think of to really lock in our costs and try and control them in an inflationary environment. So beyond that, the next business concepts are going to be, how can we manage our cash flow better? Meaning, how can we get people to pay us sooner, and thus we have our cash, as opposed to fighting insurance companies and patients and getting them to try and pay their bills in a timely fashion? Can we reverse that and flip it on its head somehow? You'll see a video on that coming up in the future. And then, then it comes back to the efficiency of our systems. What can we do to make our systems flow more efficiently to where we can actually do more revenue in the same period of time and be more persuasive with our patients? And I don't mean pushy and aggressive, and I don't mean overdiagnosing, so don't hear that. But whatever it is that you feel the patient's needs, what can we do to have those conversations and be more effective so they're more willing to say yes to dentistry now? Because your costs are probably going to go up as well. Maybe another thing that we can share with them, hey, I realize, much like the rest of the world, my costs are headed up as well, and I'm going to have to raise my fees because I won't be able to stay in business otherwise, and therefore I want to encourage you to do your dentistry now before I have to charge you more as well. So if we're savvy about it in part of these conversations in all of our systems, and again, future videos are going to dig into each one of these areas much, much deeper, but if we can be really savvy about how to improve each one of these little areas, 3, 4, 5%. I mean, imagine if we improve our hygiene efficiency by 5%, our perio efficiency by 5%, our case acceptance rate by 5%, our patients paying by 5%. You add all that up, that's a 20-some% improvement in how our business runs. That is going to be the key to future success. What can we do to make our systems flow better? Plus, of course, all the other things that we have previously discussed. So stay tuned for some future videos on how can we dig into the nitty-gritty of all of these to make them all flow better and more effectively for you, and allow us all to plan to be more prepared for, as some are calling it, a fiscal Armageddon, because all things sort of point that way. So I think it's a good time to really evaluate, train our teams to be more effective at all their jobs, so we can do well in the midst of challenges. Stay tuned. If you have questions, feel free to reach out to us. Happy to chat with you about whatever needs you might have. You can access through our website at acceleratemypractice.com, and otherwise, stay tuned for more help on how to prepare for the coming future. Otherwise, have a wonderful day.